if Biden exhibits moral clarity and courage, which he's very capable of doing, we saw what he did on October the 7th himself, and there are signs that the U.S. administration may be preparing for that type of eventuality. We see these B-52 bombers that are parked in Qatar, in the American base in Doha, and we've seen other major military assets of the United States moving into the area. It's very possible that in the next 8 to 10 weeks we could see a major action against Iran. It is, though, dependent from Israel's point of view, what actions the Iranians take or don't take. It is clear that the entire Middle East looks at two players as the strong horse, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. They are the strong horses today, to use an old Arab Muslim term, the strong horse, which is a 700-year-old concept that strong horses replace weak horses in the Middle East through cycles of violence. That's how history works in the Middle East. It depends whether the United States and Israel will cooperate on attacking Iranians' nuclear installations, because they do certainly present a clear and present threat to the entire Middle East and the free world, and I think both men know it.
Dr. Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. We have a new president, Donald Trump, 47th president-elect. I want to get your first assessment on this election. President
Trump's election was a watershed moment in American history, and really the second time that a former president lost and then won in non-contiguous elections. And President Trump won by a very wide margin, which was unexpected by the elites in the United States. And what happened there before we moved to the effect in the Middle East is that, the American people, the American middle class was not listened to. They were not heard by the elites, and they were saying, we're unhappy with the way America is going. We're paying too much money at the gas pumps, too much money in the supermarket. We're suffering from inflation. We're very frightened about our border security, which, by the way, makes them somewhat similar to the Israelis in that sense, in terms of border security.
Absolutely.
And we're very concerned about America's international image as being very weak. The American people saw tens of thousands of students across the country in the best universities and in state universities, essentially siding with the organization, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas, which was the precursor to Al Qaeda, which killed 3,000 Americans on 9/11. So there is this sort of closed circle of terror that the American people were very practical people, they're rational people, they're good people, understood that enough is enough. They need another rules-based society, and I think that's what they got.
I'll remind you that this year alone, we saw on TikTok a trend of bin Laden being praised by this generation of Gen Zs, and I think it's just very much like you said, this middle America, the regular American voter said enough is enough.
Very much so. And I think that enough and enough also extends to the Iranian regime and its DNA of terror subversion and instability across the Middle East. And this is a real center stage danger for the West. It's not only about Israel, it's the West. And I think that President Trump knows that there are threats out there to the West, and that Iran poses a threat to the West. And people remember in his first term that he broke out of this very dangerous JCPOA, and he almost bankrupted the terror regime in Tehran, which was the right policy. He had coordinated with Israel then. And in 2024, President Donald J. Trump is conveying different messages. And this creates a complexity, I must say. And the message that we hear from him we heard from him in the campaign, and subsequently, is he is a man that will end wars. He is a man that does not want to inherit wars for the United States. and therefore the art of the deal, as his book title reflects, is going to be a very high risk proposition for the Middle East, because as you and I know, and many of our viewers know, there is no such thing as a quick deal in the Middle East. Arab culture is a patient culture, the way Iranian culture is a patient culture.
It's all about haggling and negotiating.
Haggling, negotiating, taking vengeance. It could take years, it could take decades, but it comes around. And here you have a situation in which the Iranian regime and its octopus and the tentacles of its terror octopus is destabilizing every country in the Middle East, and has, since 1979, promised death to America, death to Israel. And its backing of the October 7th mass murder, kidnapping, and atrocities, mass rape of women and children. These atrocities were part of that, of the Iranian regime and its Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad proxies. It was part of that promise that they were fulfilling. This is what the West must understand, is that the jihad, the holy war that Iranian regime promised upon Khomeiни's return from Paris, is exactly what's happening in the Middle East, and that must be stopped. And the United States has a central role and a critical role in defeating this Iranian regime jihad, so we can get back to the possibilities for peace, stability, and security and prosperity for all people in the Middle East.
So, Dan, as you mentioned, we're watching here from Jerusalem, and it has to be said that there was a resounding sigh of relief when Trump was elected, beating out Kamala Harris, who, when we're looking at Trump's first presidency, of course, was one of the most positive ones when it comes to Israel, the recognition of the Golan Heights, the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital, the moving of the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, among many other things. But I want to ask you, do you expect this presidency to be similar to that first one we saw, where he had very close ties with Netanyahu, very close ties with Israel, very much acted in favor of Israel? Do you think that we will see that same attitude towards Israel this time around, given the situation?
It's a very difficult question. What is clear, Sarah, is that the world that President Trump inherited in 2024 is a fundamentally different world than he inherited in 2016. We not only did we see in 2016 the deal of the century be formulated and not implemented due to Palestinian opposition and rejection of the entire formulation. But in 2024, we saw the war of the century, the massacre of the century on October 7, 2023. The world changed on October 7th. And that means that the relationships between allies and the relationship between adversaries and allies will also, on some level, change, because the whole chessboard has changed. Now, what it means for President Trump and Netanyahu's relationship is unclear. It is clear that the two men have similar worldviews about security, stability, peace through strength. And I'm quite sure that President Trump was pleased with the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu was the first leader to congratulate him upon his victory on November the 5th. What is unclear, though, is that a new member of President Trump's family is a Lebanese gentleman, Massa Bonos, and he was responsible, very consequentially, for delivering the Arab vote in the United States. And that was a very substantial development for President Trump and very unexpected. Now, his son-in-law has also taken, apparently, a central role in the designing of policy for Lebanon. He's promised to sort of somehow bring peace and stability to Lebanon, but it can also impact on the Palestinian issue, which is an unknown but potentially very concerning. Why is it concerning? Because October 7th proved that the conflict between Israel and its arch enemy, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, and its Hamas and Palestinians, PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad proxies also extends to the so-called moderate Palestine Liberation Organization, or the more moderate, if you will. They call them secular and more moderate, and the Fatah, the chief faction there, as well as the Palestinian Authority. It's not the case. The Palestinian Authority for the last 30 years has been inciting to murder, in incentivizing young Palestinians to murder. And the deal of the century in 2016 did platform and advance and require a lot of the principles of peacemaking that would reject pay to slay, meaning incentivizing young Palestinians to kill Jews, to inciting young Palestinians to kill Jews, international conspiracy theories against the Jews. It requires de-radicalization. So in short, the principles of Trump's peace plan for 2016 must be super implemented in 2024 to 28 if there's to be any chance of reaching some sort of accommodation and territorial resolution with the Palestinians.
We're entering a critical time period in the next 3 months until January 20th, when Trump is actually inaugurated into the White House. So much can happen. I want to ask you, Dan, do you expect Biden in his last 3 months here in office, in Washington, do you believe that he will use this time to sort of settle scores with Netanyahu when it comes to the war in Gaza? Specifically, we're talking about arms embargo and pressure to provide even more humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip and eventually to end the war in Gaza.
President Biden, with all of the political differences and criticisms that the Netanyahu coalition has had of the Biden administration and some of the very difficult moments between the two governments, President Biden has said he is the first Irish Zionist. We don't know if, in fact, President Biden's real source of anger is more against those in his own party that prevailed upon him to withdraw his nomination. Because now we see, in the aftermath of the lost election by landslide, there's some really hard feelings coming from him towards those who said, you've got to put Vice President Harris in, and you've got to step aside, something that neither he nor his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, wanted to do. So I'm not sure there's a settling of scores between him and Netanyahu. It may be a settling of scores between him and his colleagues in the United States. Having said that, we do remember that there was a settling of scores, so to speak, between President Obama and Netanyahu back during Obama, at the end of Obama's second term, when Obama actually refused to veto a very problematic and even fraudulent resolution, UN Security Council Resolution 2334, which essentially called all settlements illegal, which is patently false, according to the United Nations' own charter. So Biden could potentially take some of these actions. I would assess that Biden has an opportunity to neutralize Iran with strength, with power, together with Israel, and that could be his legacy, is to stop a nuclearizing Iran, an aggressive Iran that is fomenting death and destruction everywhere it goes. That may be Biden's direction if he and Netanyahu cooperate well enough, because they both know the Iranian regime is the enemy, is the shared enemy of the free world.
We're already seeing the effects post this election. Qatar pulling out as a mediator in the hostage negotiations, essentially warning all Hamas officials who have, enjoyed diplomatic immunity, residing in these luxurious villas in Doha, have essentially been told to leave.
Yeah, they've made the Qatari regime look bad. They have humiliated them by refusing time after time to engage in any kind of serious negotiation or deal all the hostages for whatever they agree to. But these are the Qataris messaging the Trump administration, in my view, that enough is enough. and that look, Qatar is a player behind the scenes, not only on negotiations, but there has been a lot of Israeli-Qatari relations and American-Qatari relations.
We saw the World Cup. When was it? Just 2 years ago, with a small but still significant Israeli diplomatic office allowing Israelis to travel to see the games. I mean, there are back-channel talks for sure.
Most definitely, and we know that there have been, in a way, shuttle flights from Tel Aviv to Doha, regardless of the ongoing and unsuccessful hostage negotiations. So Qatar is still an important address for Israel. And let's remember, it was a Qatari-Israeli agreement that, unfortunately, regretfully, in retrospect, was funding the Hamas regime to the tune of tens of millions of dollars in a cooperative move. So, there has been, is, and will continue to be a relationship with Qatar, even though they are a headquarters for the Muslim Brotherhood. And, this is the complexity of the Middle East. As Professor Bernard Lewis said, in the Middle East, nothing makes sense and everything makes sense.
Absolutely. And so when we were talking about these hostage negotiations, unfortunately, yesterday marked 400 days of captivity for those 101 hostages still held captive by Hamas in Gaza. Trump has reportedly told Netanyahu that he wants Israel to wrap up the war in Gaza by the time he returns to office. But could Israel extend any potential hostage negotiations till January, when Trump actually goes into office, in order to have to make fewer concessions when leading these negotiations, with Trump leading these negotiations?
Could well be. There is an argument to say that there can be a deal by the time he reaches the office, January 20th, 2025, and that would be, a heavy price, cessation of the war in Gaza versus in exchange for every single hostage not alive and, yes, still alive. And that is a deal that has not been agreed upon yet. Prime Minister Netanyahu has talked about total victory and has advanced the idea now for 13 months that the more that Israel destroys Hamas infrastructure and decimates the command structure, which has happened, including the killing of Sinwar, that the hostages would be released. We have not seen that yet. So it definitely can use the heavy hand of the American administration in order to force a deal. But a deal taking shape, and we've heard this from some of our top military planners and former senior generals, that it would require a cessation of the war, of a much weakened Hamas, and a possibility that Israel can go back in at will to finish off the Hamas. But there is a critical national security element, that is to receiving back all of the hostages in order to allow Israel to do sort of a national reset, because this has really become such a bloody albatross around the collective neck of Israel, and a tragedy that really has to end, even if it's a very heavy price, because the Hamas is not 1/20th of what it was 13 months ago.
Biden will also likely push to advance some sort of diplomatic agreement between Israel and Lebanon, a direction that Netanyahu appears to support.
Yes, I mean, Lebanon's an even more complex situation because there are so many tribes, families, and clans in that one mini-state that is controlled, financed largely, and controlled by the Islamic Republic of Iran by virtue of Hezbollah, their chief proxy. So it's very difficult. It's a very difficult proposition to assess that so many different ethnic groups are going to be able to come together, both in government and in the parliament, and even more expressly in the military, because to take over your own security means that the command structure has to be a unified command structure and has to be a disciplined command structure. And it's very difficult because when you're a tribal clan-based society, it's very difficult to call upon your soldiers, the men and women of your clans and tribes, to listen to the commands of those that don't come from your clans and tribes. So for the Christians to be commanding the Shiites and the Shiites to be commanding the Sunni, and all of them to be cooperating with the Druze, it's a very difficult play. And this is really where Lebanon, which is almost 50% Shia and 50% Sunni Arabs, it's always been a serious challenge since the civil war in 1976. So it could be that Trump and his son-in-law and their connections, their deep connections, would be able to make some sort of a total inclusive deal that would include a diplomatic deal with Iran, stopping the nuclear program with verification, Hezbollah pulling back well beyond former resolution, UN Security Council Resolution 1701, north of the Litani River, as well as Gaza. It could be one package deal. That would be a typical Trump.
Real deal of the century.
That would be the real deal of the century. Yeah. That Trump is capable of doing, but there's a price for every deal to be done.
Absolutely. Dan, final question. The big other deal in the century that was on the table right before October 7th, the Israel-Saudi normalization deal. I want a quick answer from you. Will that happen when Trump comes into office, in your eyes?
The Saudis have been very interested in completing a normalization deal with Israel. October 7th put the brakes on it, not because the Saudis were heavily critical of Israel. In fact, they were heavily critical of the Hamas and the massacres that took place. But look, the Saudis, as the leaders of the Muslim world, not only the Arab Muslim world, really, but the Muslim world, that control the major holy sites of the Muslim world in Mecca and Medina, they have to be mindful, if you will, if we could use that word in a Middle East context, of the Muslim world, of the 1,600,000 or 700,000 Muslims around, and public opinion, which is very difficult. Having said that, it's rather clear that they do not require a Palestinian state in order to normalize with Israel, but they do require the transitioning from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. The 2020 Abraham Accords were done with the blessing and direction and sanction of Saudi Arabia, and on the one hand, Trump administration on the other. And it's very clear that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is very forward-looking. He wants to see a region that's what they call startup region, fashioned after Israel's technology, and very forward-looking capabilities in defense and in other areas, and that I think we will see some serious progress. It will also depend if there is some deal to be done to calm things in the Middle East, because calm will be a very important factor in allowing Crown Prince, who will become king, in order to bring the region forward. And he, in my assessment, he very much sees Israel as a partner in moving the regime forward. And that's been our position. The Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs is really to position Israel as that partner and anchor of security, stability, and prosperity, together with the what we call the more moderate Middle East partners. And as you know, we've been making great progress in doing that across the Middle East with our Saudi friends, as well as their allies and partners.
It's certainly the Israeli government and the Saudi leadership have emerged, so to speak, to quote you, Dan, as the strong horses of the region when we're talking about 2024, a Middle East with Trump in the White House. It's certainly going to be a very interesting next few months. Dr. Dan Diker, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you.